day, everyone. Welcome to One Finance World. We are delighted to welcome you to this exciting event that promises a deep dive into the realm of finance and fintech. Over these two transformative days, we will explore, learn, and share insights that will shape the industry's future. Our conference serves as a global platform where pioneers, thought leaders, and innovators will come together. The knowledge exchanged and relationships forged here will undoubtedly create hopefully long-lasting relationships across the financial landscape. So this morning here we're joined from France, Stephan Pouyat. He is a member here of the One Business World board. He is a reputed financial businessman. He is the Chief Strategy Officer and Managing Director at a Digital Economist. He is the founder and CEO of Blue Motion. And as I mentioned here, a board member at One Business World. Previously, Stephan was with Euroclear Bank, $33 trillion in euros under asset custody on cross-border platforms. He had a number of senior executive roles at Euroclear Bank, including global head of capital markets and funds, and co-division head in charge of group strategy, product, business development, innovation, and M&A. That's a lot of roles, Stephan, for sure. He's a global financial markets executive with long-lasting and sustainable relationships here at the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and the multilateral development banks. His education degree, his polytechnic degree, is from EPFL in Switzerland, and he's done a number of the executive MBA programs here at the Harvard Business School here in the United States. Stephan, welcome for joining us today. Your topic is sustainable capital goals as a powerful catalyst to deliver the sustainable development goals, that being under the UN banner. What do you actually mean by that? How about we start off that way? Why don't we frame the title, and we'll go from there? Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Glenn, for having me. Thank you for the introductions. It's delightful. Anyway, I also want to say one word before. I think One Business World is doing an amazing job of bringing all those entrepreneurs, and we will need them because they will definitely participate to the topic that I'm just about to talk about. It's a community of well-educated and good hearts to try to bring the world in the right place. And I think to start with, we didn't come with a capital development goals initially, as I think the world thought that it would come naturally by defining the sustainable development goals. But what we have to recognize is that despite about a decade of talking about achieving these sustainable development goals and reducing warm climate, unfortunately, little has been achieved, and lots of word, but little concrete outcome. And one of the key reasons for it is that we always say that to ourselves, if you give yourself the mean, you have a chance to achieve something. I think we left the means on the side. We hope that the means will naturally come and follow the sustainable development goals. But the fact is that we have to agree that this has not been the case. So we have to first define the capital development goals in order for the sustainable development goals to materialize. And this is very important because when you looked at who owns the capital development, the capital assets in the world today, Euroclear itself is a 33 trillion backbone, but if you combine the two SCGs, the two market infrastructure, cross-border market infrastructure, you are about at 50 trillion. And the world of cross-border is about 100 trillion. This is significant amount of money. And that money should be put at work to support the sustainable development goals. They are most of the time the money that are held by sovereign wealth funds and central banks and ministries of finance. And that money cannot stay on stage and wait for some miracle that somebody else is going to make the trick and make it happen. So it really has to come from them, along with, obviously, the private sector. But for that to materialize, we absolutely need to define what we mean by capital development goals. And hopefully today I'll speak a little bit about it as we go.
When you think about those capital goals, they clearly need to be global, right? They're just not relegated necessarily to let's call it developed markets, right? I would think part of the goal surrounding deployment of capital would be getting it to the areas where it may be needed most, or perhaps on the issues where it may be needed most. I know, Stephen, in some of your digital economist work, you've done some great writings recently, and you talk about issues like food insecurity and obviously climate, and trying to get those capital goals to those areas of need. How about from a deployment standpoint? How do you help make that easier, or a little bit more transparent, or less clunky?
Uh, To be honest, this is also a second very important observation we had. So the first one was very little progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And then the next question is, how come capital has not flown naturally where it was most needed? Well, in fact, it's not as simple as that. It's not because you want to, it's not a political decision. It is a risk management component. People will not give money to anyone around the world if they feel that the money that they are going to give is not going to result in the productive outcome that is expected. So if you look at the circulation of capital around the world, 98% of the circulation remains within the same ecosystem. So only 2% goes out. And if we want the Sustainable Development Goals to actually really develop, we don't need 2%. We don't even need 10%. We need 20%. And we
Yeah.
need, as you said, we need a global ecosystem. We need all to be in it together. And what does it mean? Well, it means that if you are on the receiving end, you need to understand the rules of international capital flow. You cannot just have your national rules and your way of operating. You have to actually comply with international transparency and disclosure. You have to put those things in a proper framework. And because historically this has never taken place, the level of standardization and therefore the level of transparency, which leads to the level of comfort for the asset owners to feel that if they were to go into that directions, their investment will be properly managed on both sides. That is the reason why it doesn't fly. All right. So we need to accompany the movement of capital redeployment, and that redeployment has to go through this international standardization, which doesn't exist. That's why capital goals must define those international standardization, so that if you were to invest in Brazil, in Mexico, in South Africa, Zimbabwe, anywhere around the world, in Vietnam, the rule of the game would be exactly the same, so that like this, the level playing field will be lifted. Everybody will have the same chance to be able to actually attract international investors. Unfortunately, today, it's extremely complicated. As soon as you cross the 98% closed loop ecosystem, it's extremely bespoke. And if it's bespoke, a lot of people are very afraid. So either they spend a huge amount of effort and they get there, or they just don't go there, and they remain inside the ecosystem. And therefore, the Sustainable Development Goals can never be reached, because you need this development of capital if you want to actually achieve that.
Well, it sounds like the capital's there, but it's kind of stuck inside the plumbing, if you will, right? You can't seem to get the faucet turning on enough to get something more than just a little bit of a drip out. And I'm sure the 2% or 3% that comes out is doing some good, but it's probably very localized at that point. It's not as far impactful. It's not perhaps as wide reaching, because it's not flowing at a 10% or a 20% level, as it just kind of stays inside. So it sounds like you wind up kind of talking around everybody, right? Everybody's all for it. Everybody comes back and speaks to the value around those types of sustainable development goals and the good that it can do. But then sometimes, when you get to the actual actions on it, it's not being facilitated as well as it should be. Now, on the risk management side, in your experience, especially over the new landscape here, are institutions, banking, governments, uh, is that a new level of risk for them that they look at? Are they adding sustainability and sustainable development goals to one of those types of things that they're regularly reviewing, whether it's at the senior management level or the board level? Because you think of risk models and it's always kind of a maybe perhaps a more traditional type of kind of framework they look at. How, and given your experience, Stephen, how are we seeing like frameworks developing that are adding these? Are they inserting them into existing frameworks? How are people being able to assess those types of risks?
So it's first of all, I think risk is often the reason why people change their behavior. And I would say we have been a bit fortunate, and you could say that I have to put this with a pinch of salt, obviously, when I say fortunate, but the Silicon Valley Bank, followed by the Credit Suisse meltdown, um, is triggering signals that we need to think slightly differently on the way we are actually measuring where the 98% capital flows that everybody felt was safe is not that safe. Number one. Number two, I think the world slowly recognize that, and when I say the world, I really mean the government related entities, that it's nice to be extremely conservative and to say, I cannot invest in those emerging market or in this developed economy market because I don't know the legal framework. I don't know the risk profile of those countries. So I prefer to stay where I used to invest. That's where my comfort zone is. That's where my risk management profile is. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy to excuse yourself from not deploying your capital to the right place of the world by saying that, oh, I'm really sorry, but my risk framework prevent me from going into these directions. Well, yes, it's correct, but up to us to put the right risk framework to allow this path to go. But another element that I think people start to realize, as I say, government-related countries start to realize, is that the climate deterioration around us is clearly showing that we have to start to cater for that, because the consequences of these climate roller coasters of dry, warm, species, biodiversity, species being extinguished is going to have significant impact. And people, to your point earlier, to your first point, people have, we all have to look at that globally. This is a global problem. And France cannot look at it within France. I was just like working with them very frequently, recently. It's great to have a nuclear electricity systems. This is the most advanced nuclear power electricity ecosystem. But look at the rest of the world. The rest of the world is still working on extremely polluted energy consumption. Look at the tankers that goes around the world. They are the biggest, most polluter in the planet. And the number of tankers that just cross the ocean every single day in what we call fully loaded oil, fuel, fossil, these should be priorities for all of us, because you can clean and I would say optimize your own individual behavior. But if the big polluter around the world are not tackled properly, then the climate deterioration will continue to kick in and so forth. So it is a must. We need to go out of this 98% comfort zone, risk profile and all that. But for that, we need to bring the right tools. And this is unfortunately, in the advanced economy so far, we didn't need to go so deep in details. We didn't need to go so deep in granularity. Technology is bringing that granularity today. And that granularity needs to be embedded, not just on the advanced economy, but exactly as I said, also in the rest of the world. That's what we call capital goals, right? We need to put this transparency fully embedded into deployment of capital. Like this, if this is very clearly defined, this is very clearly set, there is no more excuses not to deploy the capital, because this is a global phenomenon. We need to all together to participate in an intelligent and wise way. But it cannot be the far west, because people, and rightly so, central banks and sovereign wealth funds back home, they said, I have fiduciary duties vis-a-vis my own citizens, so I cannot just waste all my money out of the window. That's where the capital goals kicks in.
Well, I mean, you're in Europe, Stephen. So what's the mood when you look at Credit Suisse and UBS? What's the mood in Europe for the average citizen on let's call it the rescue?
Well, I think there are two levels. All right. The first one is that you have seen certainly the European reactions, or European banks saying that they had a far more solid banking system than in the US. So that's a bit patching yourself in the back and saying, okay, everything is great. The truth is that, as I mentioned earlier, 50 trillions of the cross-border fixed income industry is extremely highly concentrated. All this concentration is also highly concentrated in few financial institutions around the world. So no one is isolated from contagious effect. That's a given. We saw that in the Lehman Brothers crisis, and we saw that in Enron. If you look at Silicon Valley Bank, it's a kind of an Enron base. 20 years later, how come this is still there? And it's the fourth largest bank in the US. So it's not like if those are small little fish left and right, and the shock is certainly there. So this, to your question about the civil the citizen, especially in Europe, they have been quite I would say vocal about capitalisms. And is capitalism doing good, or is capitalism doing bad? And I think, again, here, if we leave capitalism to the complete free flow, then we see that the track record is that it probably is going to actually use some business decision drivers that are not necessarily there to protect the planet, to protect the next generations, and so forth. If you look at it carefully, you see that the gaming industry is receiving massive amount of funding. So you want to say it's great to have a fantastic entertainment industry. I am all for it, as long as this doesn't come at the deteriorations of the planet biodiversity and water protections and species protection. So we need to make sure that we do this in a well-balanced manner. And for the time being, the financial industry, by the way, is the only one that doesn't have a global representation. You have a healthcare representation globally. You have the United Nations and all the different fields within the United Nations that are there, global work done on education and things like that. But the financial world is the only one that doesn't have a global organization oversight, if you wish. And I think that is what is missing. I think we need to sit down together and to define this oversight, so that we avoid having this conflict between the US regulators versus the European regulators and the Chinese and so forth. It's fine. We're not here in the kindergarten ground. This is real people. This is life. The global warming is coming up. We need to act decisively together. And I would advocate to create this type of organization together, similar to the United Nations, but focusing on finance.
Well, it would sound like with a goal like that, having a transparent platform and where data could be visible, where people in a risk management kind of position would be able to kind of look into the future and look over the landscape. But a lot of people get very close to the vest as to yeah, okay, there's public companies and you report that way, but they kind of fall into the usual type of, well, what's required and what's not, right? I'm only going to tell you what's required. I'm not gonna necessarily go a little bit beyond that. You mentioned Enron and obviously the current state of affairs here with some of these financial institution stress points and rescues and issues. How is it that we don't learn that somehow we learn from the past, right? I was reading actually this morning in the Wall Street Journal. They had a little bit of an op-ed on some of what some of the most recent transcripts with some of these executives here locally, whether it was Silicon Valley locally in the United States, Silicon Valley Bank, or here in New York where I am, a Signature Bank, another one that was taken over over the last month or two, and they were saying how part of you talk about global regulation. Part of it was they were taking kind of their lead from the Federal Reserve. And when the Federal Reserve is using things or phrases like, well, inflation is transitory, if you're the bank executive, okay, if that's the professional view on that, so maybe I don't necessarily watch the interest rate spread so much because, oh, it's going to be transitory. And yeah, inflation's pounding us, but if it's going to go away. So as they were kind of feeding that line into everybody over the last 24 months, and all of a sudden you had kind of the jump that we did over the last 12 to 15 months with rates, you could understand how people kind of got stuck in that kind of squeeze, if you will, on the interest rate side. I mean, so from a regulation side, I mean, we talk about transparency. Maybe technology is the way forward for that, right? Getting the information out there, making it available, having people be able to make valued and fair judgments based on what they're seeing. Because we can't. It just seems like every 10 or 12 years this keeps happening, right? Or
Right.
this has to have, there's a line in The Godfather where the original Godfather, where they talk about, this kind of stuff with the families. It happens every 10, 15 years. You got to kind of clean everything out. And that's kind of what it seems like we forget, right? We go through an Enron like we did 20 years ago, and you create things like Sarbanes-Oxley here in the United States, and then you have the financial squeeze maybe 10 years later, and then you get Dodd-Frank, and we keep layering things on, but we don't seem to be like learning our lesson. Or maybe we just put it in and then we let our guard down again. Oh, well, this is in here and it's gonna help us. How do we get more people to kind of dialogue about it and make sure that, if this is in fact leading practices, that everybody signs on to it and everybody has an opportunity to kind of work it, if you will, in an effort to kind of open that capital and get it out of the 98%.
Well, everything ties up together, but I would definitely say the following one. I have been lucky enough to spend 20 years in the art of an international financial infrastructure. And I am convinced that there is a layer in the financial world which is the same as in the electricity production world. Everyone should be able to have electricity in his house. Everyone. And electricity should not be a commercial product that divides populations and citizens and the wealth from the poor and these type of things. So we need to establish this layer of plumbing if we want. I'm okay with calling it plumbing. I don't mind. That's what I've done for 20 years, where people cannot use this plumbing as a competitive edge, hiding things to the regulators, hiding things to the shareholders of those companies, hiding things to the bondholder or security holders of those things. This is not acceptable. Honestly, this is not acceptable. So this layer is today indeed clearly there. Technology is there. The granularity of this technology is there. There have been attempts in actually developing that technology in different part of the world, including in the US. But this is done by private interest, vested private interest, which I think is going to create a cow over a cow. I don't think that's the right way to go. I think we should sit down. We should take the best ecosystem that has been built out there, define those transparency rules, and those transparency rules, let's be very clear, they are there as risk management monitoring tools. The regulators should not be in a position to say, Stephan, I've been talking to them recently, and they were basically saying, We all know that the 60-age-old ecosystem that has been created out of these monolithic applications, one above the others, have a huge ecosystem of opacity. It's very complicated. Nobody can see through. Nobody can give us data in real time. So we are hostage. Well, this is not an answer. The citizens will not accept that the regulators are hostage by an aging technology. So we need to define these technology principles together, and that's why we don't want to do it ourselves right now. I could do it, but I don't want to do it. It's not the point. The point is that we need to collectively do it. We need to agree because the technology is there so that everybody can rely on that, so that the regulators can, for the first time in their entire life, can anticipate and understand predictability of data as opposed as just reacting after the facts because they were surprised. And sometimes, and I don't want to be too tough on my colleagues, but sometimes they reacted with a wrong weapon against something that they felt was unacceptable. And the pendulars went way too far down the road, which created other side effects and other potential crises. We are at a time where weather channel predictability is ready for finance, if I may call it like that. And I think that would be a much easier use of capital. People will lose much less, like in the crypto crisis we just saw recently. And I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to create the wrong impression, but we know that there are going to be other financial crises. Like we know there are other pandemia that are going to come, other climate risks that are going to come. It's about time to create a market utility in finance, the same way as we would do for electricity and some other water systems and things. These are, for me, finance is a vital resource, like water, like electricity, and like food, and we don't treat that this way due to the huge vested interests that are embedded into the ecosystem. And I just hope that now we are at a stage where common sense is going to come, and that people realize that it's not because we say that the world needs to be better that it will become better, but that we actually are defining it from the horse mouse, which is the financial element. Because as I said, capital are the means to execute on what we want to do. And if we want to protect our planet for the next generations, if we feel we own that to our next generation, I have 4 kids. I will not be able to die knowing I was in the middle of this mess and I didn't try anything to make a better world. I think this is just sacrificing the next generations when you deliberately know that the existing capital flow are not going to be dispersed in the right place to save the planet. So I have to do it. I cannot not do it.
No, well, an engaged industry and engaged citizenry is very important. I mean, you look at the evolution of moving away from the phrase or the concept of just shareholders to stakeholders. Stakeholders is a much larger, group of, including the community, right? When you think about people looking at their various goals and the like. One of the interesting things you mentioned, electricity, right, and water and all of that. And you always, when they talk about those types of industries, they almost become people think of it more as a utility, right? And you think about like the grid, the electrical grid. Maybe there should be a finance grid that people have. When you think about it, you think about having that kind of safety net in place, or three-dimensional chess. When you come back and look at from a transparency or some sort of extremely high-level dashboard that people around the world could look at when they start to think about where's the next hotspot or what might be coming next, from a risk standpoint. Because I mean, we can't keep getting surprised every 10 or 12 years when the next shoe drops, right? When something comes back and we come back and say, how could we allow this to happen again? Or didn't we learn from our past experiences? Isn't that really what growth should be about?
And Glenn, there is an additional thing that I would say bother me a little bit as well, is that most of the time, not always, but most of the time, the financial crisis is paid not by the people who have created the crisis in the first place. So it seems to be always the same type of people who are benefiting from the rise and find a way to escape from the down. And who is paying? It's the civilians around the world, or it's the different countries, and and then there is an interest rate that is coming up, and people print more paper. Everything looks magic to a certain part of the world. And I definitely, you could add, by the way, that technology has also its own grid, like electricity and water. I think in some industries we have understood the importance of, internet is a grid to me, right? I think finance has never been considered as a grid, but it should. It should, because it is the mean of survivors of our humanity, of our species. And by the way, I want to, before we run out of time, I also want to say one more thing. At the Digital Economist, we do something that is, for me, extremely important, is that we just don't want to define capital for the common good, as we call it, via mathematical or technical risk management framework, as we discussed, and the transparency and the predictability, everything has to be there. But what we also want to do is that we want to make sure that we have a human-centric approach to capital. And that human-centric approach, and I could call it even life spaces approach, should be fully embedded into the way we are going to deploy capital in the next 20 years. And I'm not talking about myself. It's not about me, but us as 8 billion of inhabitants. We should be able to deploy this capital and to do good and to develop good things, but at the same time, making sure that we do not destroy the species that are around ourselves. I was yesterday in a park here in France, and the guide, the wonderful guide, they were explaining to us that 80% of the insects have disappeared, and that the big birds, they concentrate in this place where we were, simply because that's the only place where there is enough food. But the consequences of it is that the animals are actually producing less babies. The birds are producing less babies because they know that they cannot feed the little ones coming up, and that you don't want to see the animals telling us what will happen to us as a species, that we start to stop having babies because actually we know that we are in a complete degrading mode environment. So it is important to define those capital goals with a human-centric, I would say, agenda, very much so.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting way to look at it. Is perhaps the wildlife will lead us, or make us more aware. You mentioned earlier, well, you kind of alluded to it. I mean, we often seem to be fighting the current war with the previous ammunition, right, or previous technology. We all got to really start to think forward as to how do we try to anticipate better going forward that next issue. And again, you're a digital economist, your capital for the common good. I mean, you've got so many wonderful thoughts in those publications as to how you can take what we're good at, and we are good at finance around the world. We've got some incredibly talented people and companies and regulators and markets. And if we can't pull it off, then who's going to do it, right? I mean, who's going to build that next piece? We have so much talent in the world around us, and people that focus on causes like this, and looking to deploy capital and putting it where it really could do some good. If we can't do it, then who's going to do it? Because as you said, the citizens are kind of relying on this. They're kind of counting on us to get this right.
I have next week I'm going to speak at the European Web3 Summit, and one of the core topic is about AI. And you mentioned it at the beginning. I've went to Polytechnic School in Lausanne. I went to Harvard Business School. I could say from around the world, I'm a decent, I've received a decent training background. The human capacity is, and I'm not a specialist, so I don't want to be quoted on that. But what I understood is that the human capacity maximum brain power is to deal with 25 million data points. Chat GDP is at 145 million data points, already 4 times bigger than our human brain. Chat GDP 4 is at 1 trillion data point. And everyone will tell us that the AI is just at its infancy. It's going to, like computer, it's going to come to 10 trillion, 30 trillion. So the world as I knew it when I was a kid and my career, where everything was based on human performance, how your brain power made a difference between yourself and your colleagues around. That is how my education and my environment worked. Now I said to my kids, don't even try. It's like music, At the beginning, people were saying that digital music will never replace the quality of the sounds of a real analogical music, until that we realized that the quality of the digital music was not even perceived by the human ear anymore, that it was so advanced. Okay. So I said to them the same thing. I said, AI brain power has already superseded humankind for sure. So what does it mean? How are we going to relate ourselves to each other and to this AI machine ecosystem that we have? And we need to redefine a social contract. We need to redefine a social contract where the dignity and the ability to interact with our environment, work, find a job, being paid, is going to be driven by a different matrix than the one I used to have when I was a kid. Me, it was very simple. It was myself as a human against other humans, and my performance was driving my salary up or down. That was basic. Now, I know as a person, I'm 54, I know that I'm lucky because between now and the end, I could claim that computer will match me and I will be retiring. So I can say I escape from it. But my kid, they will be outperformed the day they are entering job. How are we going to deal with that? So that's why we have this human-centric and this social contract included into this capital for common good and this capital goals that we need to define. And this is again, I think this is a societal discussion. This is a very important societal discussion, and I'm very keen to lead that with whomever wants to facilitate that with us. Because we are not going to do that by ourselves. But and one business world, not just one financial world, is there to do that, because we want to create a community of entrepreneurs, and those people, we have a sustainability one world, we have healthcare world, we have AI, we have crypto. We are bringing all those communities together within one business world, and those are the ones who are going to have the conscience to react and to hopefully take the right decision and the right step forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've over the last 2 years of being involved with One Business World, it's and all of the people we've met, it is fascinating. You look at the businesses they've built and the creativity and the innovation and the technology they're using, and much like you said with your children, same on my side, three daughters, but I work a lot with students in a number of colleges, and you talk to them about what that career might be for them. Especially the people just starting out in school, that career may be not even dreamed up yet. As you look forward, they may that future job. Oh, I'm going to be an accountant. Oh, I'm going to be a financial analyst. Right? It could be completely different as people continue to connect. But the concept of community, working on it together, figuring it out, taking those sustainable capital goals, looking at the larger view, maybe creating some sort of crosswalk where you take those goals and you then match them up with something like the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN, and you try to get that as you said, to get that faucet going a little bit more here to get up to the double digits, closer to 20% on the deployment of the capital. only good can come from that. And that's where you're going to wind up making that even larger difference. Right now, I think a lot of what we do, and you said it in your opening remarks, is that it's very aspirational. We need to make it a little bit more contextual here as we move forward and getting it to hit on the points, because people respond, I think, when they see that type of good that's being done. When they come back and they say, "Wow, you know what? My small town, whatever part of the world I'm in, it's different than it used to be, and this is because of this type of investment. Somebody came in and deployed capital, created a project, an infrastructure project, a technology project, a healthcare project, and my life is now different. And aren't we all lucky from that?" And that comes from community and building community and having people
Right.
be transparent and open about things. I know you spoke about in some of your in your digital economist, you talk about Actis, that platform as well, and getting the availability of information out there, and that's just so important for sure.
Yeah, and it's also very interesting to I realize that I am lucky also myself to be, as you said at the beginning, quite involved with the World Economic Forum and the IMF, World Bank, G20, and other groups like that. And I've been thanks to these 33 trillions, which is a massive amount of asset, obviously. I've been quite involved all around the world. And today, the ones who are taking the lead, surprisingly, are the BRIC market. Of course, we can criticize them. Of course, we can criticize them. But nonetheless, they are the ones who said to themselves, we better react. We better focus on those human-centric purposes and helping our communities. And instead of sending the cash where we used to send the cash for so many, many years, maybe that's the right time for us to redeploy that cash around our regions in a much more advanced way, taking advantage of digital technologies and so forth. So I think you can start to see a movement, a very clear movement. And the other ones, which I have bumped into as well, are communities of African-American sport leaders who have been extremely successful. We were chatting a little bit about it before, the Steelers and the Penguins and the others, and they come to a point where they want to see their wealth be redeployed in other part of the world. And Barack Obama, being from Kenya, wanted to establish himself over there. He's also leading the path. I mean, but it is done a bit sporadically, left, right, and center. And I think that instead of letting the BRIC, which I think we should recognize that alone in doing that, we should all together as a globe, we should come together and do the right thing collegially. It's not a war. It's a duty. It's a duty to put that into the right framework. And technology is there. Actus, as you said, has done a fantastic job in trying to completely industrialize or I would say digitalize the cash flow management process, which would have completely avoid the regulators to be surprised by what was going on in the Silicon Valley Bank, because clearly, if you had access to the cash flow management, you would have noticed that there was a mismatch between asset and liabilities, independently to the opacity of this backbone that has been created 60 years ago. I agree, and I understand. I've been there. The backbone is opaque. No need to try to figure out how to make something opaque transparent. It's a waste of time and energy and so forth. But you have the ability and the duty to actually create transparency from the beginning by leveraging those new technologies and putting smart contract in place. And for the first time ever, create that transparency that we all need as a market utility.
I like that. It's kind of a call to duty, or reminding people of that duty, and I think that's an important piece. That's a good spot for us, I think, to wrap up with, Stephen, today. Thank you for joining us here from France. Have a wonderful weekend. Excellent talk, great points. Capital for the common good. Doing some wonderful work in the digital economist. We're lucky to have you involved at One Business World. And thanks for your talk today, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, everyone at One Business World. It's fantastic to be with you guys.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Hope enjoy the rest of our One Finance World Conference. Take good care. Thanks, Stephen.